Depending on who you talk to, 2022 was either an incredibly slow year for games or a very, very busy one. And honestly, I kind of fall in that later category. But the thing is, regardless of how good or not good you thought this year was, next year is looking even more spectacular. So let's just talk real quick about 22 in review and why 23 is looking so strong. When I look back at this year in gaming, the three things that really stand out to me are hardware, software, and the business side of things. From a hardware side of things, we are between releases for a lot of the major established companies. Nintendo released the Switch OLED last year, so we weren't going to get anything this year. Xbox and PlayStation hasn't been quite time yet for a mid-cycle refresh on their next-gen systems, though we do know some hardware coming out next year, like the PSVR 2. There's a decent chance we might see some other refreshes in the future, which I will talk about a little later in this video. All stuff I plan on covering as closely as I can, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on that content. But really, the one big thing we did get this year was the Steam Deck. For the past couple years, partially due to the success of the Switch, we've seen a lot of companies experiment with the concept of PC handhelds, but the Steam Deck is really the first one that was from a major company that I think made a very large impact in landing. You've seen people experiment and try out with these other PC handhelds that have released, but none have really had the kind of widespread awareness that the Steam Deck has. And as someone who in general prefers handheld gaming when possible, I am absolutely in love with the system as a concept. One of the things that I talked about when it came out is that, I was lucky enough to get one of the earlier waves of shipments, and at the time it did feel a little more rough around the edges, but I was really curious to see where it would go in the future. And really over the course of this year, between all of the updates it's received as well as some additional hardware releases like the dock, it has really shaped up into being an incredible PC handheld experience. There's still a part of me that still prefers to do some games on a more traditional PC setup, primarily because it's the kind of stuff that I want to play keyboard and mouse on, but in terms of opening up a lot of the PC indie library and bringing it over to a handheld console, along with just a few other classics that I enjoy that I haven't been able to do in handheld form natively before, it's really neat. If I'm being honest though, I do stand by the fact that I really feel like this first model is kind of a massive real-world test case, and I'm really curious to see what Valve does next. I don't know if that's something we're going to see next year in 23. That might be more of a 24 kind of thing, but look, we all know that this very first Steam Deck is absolutely a test run, and I'm curious to see after the widespread feedback and hands-on experience, alongside just the general technological progress of, time passing, what a next model could really bring to the table. Now, while it was absolutely the biggest hardware to come out this year, the Steam Deck was not the only thing we had. There were, of course, some other smaller systems that were released. We had a few mini systems. The Playdate came out, which I really love in concept, but I'll be honest, I didn't put quite as much time into as I thought I was going to. I really got to start experimenting with some of the more side-loaded games still. But one field that I think we did see some interesting releases for was controllers, especially for Nintendo and PlayStation. On the Nintendo side of things, we've begun to see a movement of controllers that rely on different stick technology in response to all the massive and well-deserved fears of stick drift. Most recently, I did do a video covering the two main controllers that are offering this, the King Kong Pro 2 and the 8-Bit Do Ultimate. Meanwhile, on the PlayStation side of things, this year we saw a lot of third-party controllers come out, which was interesting because really during the PS4 era, we didn't get a lot of third-party controllers, at least in the US. A lot of them were released overseas and you had to import them. Whereas this year, we got a new SCUF controller, which is of course a modified option, makes sense, but also an officially licensed Razer controller that is being released in the US with the Wolverine V2 Pro, which I will say has personally become my favorite controller for competitive stuff on PlayStation, although because of some of the more unique features of the DualSense, I still end up relying on that for more single-player experiences where I care about immersion, which is part of the reason why I'm really curious about the DualSense Edge coming out next year, even if it does end up having worse battery life as been reported. For Xbox, things were a little slower on the side, primarily because there were already so many options that were released right away when the Xbox Series X came out. Though I will say one of the interesting things they did have going on this year is that we did get a cheaper Elite model that came with fewer accessories, and I think even more importantly, a Design Lab option so that if you are going to throw down on a Pro controller, you actually can get one that really meets a little more your specification and style, which is awesome. The big thing this year though was games, and this is where I see a little more division among some people, because I've seen some arguments about how this year was actually a really slow one, and when I see people talk about that, what I think a lot of people actually mean was it was a slow year for AAA, which overall it was. Not that we didn't have any releases whatsoever. Obviously, God of War Ragnarok came out near the end of the year, which was fantastic. We had Elden Ring at the start of the year, which was also a huge deal, and a couple other major releases and big name franchises. Obviously, on the PlayStation side of things, we got Horizon Forbidden West, we got a new Gran Turismo, we got a new IP with Ghostwire Tokyo, which does come from a major established company though, with Bethesda. And on Nintendo side of things, they had a lot going on. Honestly, probably the most since 2017. I think some people got a little fixated on the fact that Tears of the Kingdom was supposed to come out this year and got delayed into next year, and that was such a big major focus point for a lot of folks that it just was really disappointing. But really, look at everything Nintendo had this year. We got 2 mainline Pokemon games, depending on how you count Legends Arceus. We got Xenoblade Chronicles 3, Splatoon 3, Bayonetta 3 finally came out. We got a Fire Emblem game that was a spin-off with Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes. We got a new Kirby game that was phenomenal. There was a lot going on. We're just still waiting on, the big name Nintendo franchises, Mario and Zelda, to release something new, because this year all we really got were a couple side games like Strikers. And really what I think this year was a really big win for was indie titles, and a lot of just smaller projects, either from up-and-coming studios that have already been lightly established, or even just smaller experimental projects from big companies. I'm not going to take the time to list every single game I cared about this year, but I mean some of the really nice surprise ones: Infernax, Vampire Survivors, Signalis, which came out near the end of the year and I absolutely fell in love with. It was one of my favorite surprises. Obsidian exited early access with Grounded and fully released that, alongside also releasing Pentiment, which is one of my favorite games of the year. Honestly, you should absolutely play it if you haven't yet. I feel like a lot of people aren't giving that game a chance, but it's legitimately one of the funniest things I have played all year, and it's extremely well written. We had a lot of smaller studio titles that had been hyped up for a while that finally released, like Stray, Tunic, and Sifu, all of which were fantastic. And if you're like me and are into JRPGs, this was an insanely good year. Between all of the ports and remasters of a lot of classic games, some of which I never thought we would see happen. I mean, Live Alive, which was a game that never came out in the US, finally got translated and ported over, which is incredible. We also got a remake of Crisis Core Final Fantasy. Tactics Ogre, one of my favorite games of all time, got remade again. Persona 5 finally made its way to a lot more platforms, and lots of new JRPGs to try out, some of which landed a little bit better than others. But we got Triangle Strategy, Soul Hackers 2, Xenoblade Chronicles 3, which we already mentioned real quick. Chained Echoes just recently came out. It's just been an incredible year for the genre, spanning so many different specific varieties of it. It's just been a great time. Now, talk about the business side of things real quick. I don't really want to focus too much on this, but I think it is important to note that one of the big stories this year was, of course, acquisitions. We already kind of had that momentum starting up last year, and this year it really exploded, particularly with the opening year announcement of Microsoft planning to acquire Activision Blizzard, which is just dominated news waves the entire year, as people have just been closely following whether or not the deal is going to go through, why it should, why it shouldn't. Some of it has been actual serious business discussion mixed in with just a lot of fanboy rage in one direction or the other. It's just dominated a lot of news, though I think it is worth noting that's not really the only major acquisition going on this year. Sony, of course, announced that they were acquiring Bungie in a slightly more open style partnership, where Bungie is still going to be making multi-platform stuff, but they're also going to be cueing Sony into a lot more of how to make a lot of live service style games. And Embracer Group continued to buy a lot of studios. Microsoft has been the really big focus because Activision in and of itself is such a huge company to buy singularly. But if you look over this last year, Embracer's also just been getting a lot of companies this year. I think probably one of the highest profile ones that a lot of people paid attention to was when Square Enix got rid of all their Western studios and Embracer snatched them up. So that was this year, but what makes 23 exciting? Well, again, I thought this was a great year for a lot of experimental titles. I thought we had a lot of great individual releases still, but when you look at the full catalog of everything that is slated for next year, it's a lot. I mean, first quarter alone, there is so much stuff coming out in February and March. It is unbelievable. It really feels like a lot of the stuff that has been pushed back time and time again because of things that happened in 2020 and the kind of repercussions that have just gone on since then. A lot of them are finally playing catch up and seeing releases in 23 across all major companies, really. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, Tears of the Kingdom got pushed back and is coming out now in 23. Xbox has a lot of titles that are finally being released, like Starfield and Redfall. We have not one but two major Final Fantasy games announced for next year, with 16 and 7 Rebirth. Star Wars Jedi Survivor got a confirmed time for next year. We got an Armored Core game announced out of nowhere at the Game Awards, slated for next year as well, and so many more games that I'm honestly forgetting off the top of my head right now. The point is that the list is just absolutely stacked already, and there's still plenty of time for more things to get announced, but not only from a game side of things, but also hardware, both for what we know and for what we can kind of conjecture may happen. In terms of what we know, I mentioned earlier, DualSense Edge from PlayStation is coming out, which is going to be really cool, but probably a bigger piece of hardware from them that's a little more experimental. PSVR 2 is releasing early next year as well, so that's going to be a really cool thing to try out. But also, the timing is about right now to where while we don't have hard confirmation for it, pretty good chance we might be seeing some mid-gen refreshes from, if not one, all of the companies. While it's possible that, you know, everything that happened in 2020 on causing pushbacks could impact this kind of release schedule, it's been pretty standard the last few console cycles to, at the 3-year mark, see some kind of mid-gen refresh happen. Not necessarily a Pro-style system, though that has certainly been rumored plenty, but even just some kind of slimline revision or something that just kind of mixes up the systems a little bit. In fact, we've already seen a lot of heavy rumors for PlayStation in particular, releasing a new model system that has a detachable disk drive so that there's a base digital-only system, and then if you want discs, it's an attachment you can add on and not something that's necessarily a core part of the system, thus bringing down the base cost. As I mentioned, there are also very light rumors, and honestly, it kind of feels like most of the time more of a wish list of people hoping that we're going to get some kind of PS5 Pro or the next step in the Xbox Series X line. I don't know if that's necessarily going to happen. I'm a little more skeptical of that kind of thing. I don't think it's out of the question. I'm just not seeing that as high of a priority, especially with how the PS4 Pro and Xbox One X performed for last generation. There is, however, the big hanging question of Nintendo. I did a recent video focusing a lot on, you know, what Nintendo might be having going on in the future, and I think 23 might be a little too soon. I think early 24 is more a possibility, but they've been on this really heavy, every 2 years there's a new piece of hardware. In 2017, there was the original Switch. In 2019, we got the Switch Lite, as well as the new Redbox Switch. 2021, we got the Switch OLED, and so there's that kind of hanging question of like, are we getting another system refresh next year? Are we getting an actual next-gen system next year? Are we getting just whatever the next thing is from Nintendo? If we don't actually get a release next year, we might at least find out some news near the end of it. Whether or not any of these mid-cycle refreshes end up happening, I think 23 is already set up to be an incredibly great year with the stuff we already know for sure is happening. Because let's face it, 2020 was set up to be potentially a big year because we were getting next-gen systems with PS5 and Xbox Series X, but the potential of those systems wasn't really met right away because so many games got delayed from things that happened in 2020. And so with a lot of titles finally releasing next year and the number of them that we already know about, getting any kind of hardware alongside them, and hopefully hardware that's a little more easily available, because of course stock shortages have also been an issue with the current model of systems, it might be the time that this current gen really feels like it's actually in full swing and not just a continuation of the last one. So yeah, 2022 has been an incredible year for games. It's been a good year for me too, to be honest, at least the last part of it. I kind of had a bit of a rocky time over the past summer. I don't know if you guys paid attention to video uploads, but it was definitely slowing down there for a little bit, but I'm hitting a stride right now that I am so happy with. I'm just happy that all you guys have been keeping up with the videos and enjoying them. I know I don't really address the audience that often that way, but it really does mean a lot to me. I am excited for a lot of stuff next year. I've got a couple ideas alongside the main channel of things I want to start getting into the works and experimenting more with, and I can't wait to show you guys. As you may have guessed, this is my last full video of this year. I will see you guys with some more content in 2023. And until then, I hope all of you have a wonderful end of the year, and I will see you later.